A kiss that meant the end. Bianca Vitali had never feared the men her father worked with until the night he lost everything. When her family's empire burned, there was only one man left standing, Matteo Greco. He tilted his glass, watching her with quiet amusement. "Your father gambled with the wrong man," he murmured. "And now I own you." Chapter 1. The Ember of a Fallen Empire. The crackle of the fire was the only sound louder than the pounding in Bianca Vitali's chest. Not the comforting crackle of a hearth on a winter's night, but the hungry, devouring roar of a beast unleashed. It licked at the edges of her family's legacy, consuming the opulent villa that had been her sanctuary, her prison, her entire world. The scent of smoke, acrid and thick, mingled with the sweeter, more heartbreaking aroma of burning roses, her mother's prized collection, now reduced to ash. Bianca stood on the manicured lawn, the damp chill of the late autumn night seeping through the thin silk of her dress, a stark contrast to the inferno raging before her. She was a statue carved from ice and fear, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames that mirrored the turmoil within her. It had all happened so fast. One moment, she was gliding through the annual gala, the air filled with the murmur of polite conversation and the clinking of champagne flutes. The next, chaos had erupted, shattering the illusion of security she had always known. Her father, Don Alessandro Vitali, a man who commanded respect and fear in equal measure, had been gone. That's all the frantic whispers had told her.
Gone. Taken. Lost.
The words were meaningless, empty shells that couldn't possibly contain the magnitude of the loss. He was the sun around which her world revolved, the unshakable force that had always shielded her from the darker undercurrents of their life. The air vibrated with a low thrum, a palpable tension that spoke of power and danger. Figures moved in the shadows, their faces obscured by the flickering light, their voices hushed and urgent. These were the men her father had called his famiglia, his soldiers, his loyal followers. But tonight, their loyalties seemed fractured. There was a shift in their demeanor, a subtle realignment of allegiance that sent a shiver of unease down Bianca's spine. A figure detached itself from the swirling chaos, emerging from the shadows with a deliberate grace that was both mesmerizing and terrifying.
Matteo Greco.
Even his name tasted of danger, a blend of smooth silk and sharp steel. He was younger than her father, but possessed an ancient, knowing quality, an aura of controlled power that made the other men seem like mere puppets in his presence. His eyes, the color of dark roast coffee, held a chilling intensity that seemed to pierce through her carefully constructed facade. He stopped before her, the firelight casting his features in stark relief, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw, the cruel curve of his lips, the faint scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a memento of a past she knew nothing about, but instinctively feared. He held a glass of amber liquid, swirling it slowly, the ice clinking softly against the crystal, a jarringly mundane sound in the midst of such devastation. "Bianca," he said, his voice a low, resonant murmur that cut through the roar of the flames. It was a voice that could soothe a frightened child or condemn a man to death, and she wasn't sure which version she was hearing now. A tragedy. A profound tragedy. She didn't respond, couldn't respond. Her throat was constricted, her voice trapped somewhere deep within her chest. She could only stare at him, her eyes wide and unblinking, searching for some flicker of empathy, some hint of remorse in his impassive gaze. She found none. He tilted his glass, the firelight catching the liquid within, turning it to molten gold. "Your father," he continued, his voice devoid of any discernible emotion, "gambled with the wrong man." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like the smoke that filled her lungs. Gambled? Her father never gambled. He controlled the game. He was the game. The notion was absurd, impossible. And yet, the evidence was burning before her very eyes. Matteo took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. It was a deliberate act, a display of dominance, a calculated move to dismantle what little remained of her composure. "And now," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent a fresh wave of fear through her, "I own you." The words were a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs, leaving her gasping for breath. Own her? The concept was archaic, barbaric, something out of a history book, not her reality. Yet, the look in his eyes, the unwavering certainty in his voice, told her that this was no idle threat. This was a declaration of fact. She finally found her voice, a shaky, fragile whisper that barely reached his ears. "Well, what do you mean?" He smiled then, a slow, predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your father, in his desperation, offered you, as collateral, a guarantee of payment, a rather valuable asset. Wouldn't you agree?" Bianca felt a cold dread settle in the pit of her stomach. Collateral? She was a person, not a possession, not a bargaining chip. She was Bianca Vitali, daughter of Alessandro Vitali, heiress to a legacy that was now crumbling to ashes around her. She had been raised in a world of privilege and power, shielded from the brutal realities of her father's business. But now, the shield was gone, and she was exposed, vulnerable, and utterly at the mercy of this man. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. Her father, the man she had idolized, had sold her, traded her. It was a betrayal so profound, so devastating, that it threatened to shatter her completely. "He wouldn't," she began, her voice trembling, but Matteo cut her off with a sharp, dismissive gesture. "He did," he said, his voice hardening. "And now, the debt is due. You belong to me, Bianca. Your life, your future, your very being, it's all mine." The fire roared, consuming everything she had ever known, leaving behind only emptiness and despair. But within that emptiness, a tiny spark flickered. A spark of defiance, of resilience, of something she hadn't realized she possessed. She was Bianca Vitali, and she would not be broken.
She would not be owned.
She would survive this.
She had to.
But how could she possibly escape the clutches of a man like Matteo Greco, a man who held her entire world in his hands? The first stirrings of a plan, desperate and fragile, began to form in the back of her mind, but it was overshadowed by the chilling certainty of her current predicament. Chapter 2. A Cage of Gilded Promises. The drive was silent, the luxurious purr of the engine a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside Bianca. Matteo hadn't spoken a word since they left the burning ruins of her home, his presence a heavy, suffocating weight in the confined space. She sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the blurred cityscape rushing past, her mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. She had been escorted from the scene with a chilling efficiency, a small, overnight bag hastily packed by one of the few remaining servants, a woman whose eyes had held a mixture of pity and fear. The bag contained a few hastily chosen items, a simple black dress, a pair of comfortable shoes, a worn copy of her favorite novel, a silver locket containing a miniature portrait of her mother. These meager possessions were all that remained of her former life. The car, a sleek, black Bentley, was a symbol of Matteo's power, a tangible representation of the gilded cage he was offering her. It was a world away from the familiar comfort of her father's vintage Rolls-Royce, a vehicle that had always felt like a safe haven, a symbol of family and tradition. Now, even the scent of the leather seats, rich and unfamiliar, felt oppressive, a constant reminder of her captivity. They arrived at a towering apartment building overlooking the city, a modern monolith of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the night sky. It was a stark contrast to the warm, sprawling villa she had called home, a cold, impersonal space that offered no sense of comfort or familiarity. The doorman, a burly man with a watchful gaze, greeted Matteo with a respectful nod, his eyes lingering on Bianca with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The elevator ride was another exercise in suffocating silence. Bianca stood rigidly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her gaze fixed on the illuminated numbers that marked their ascent. Each floor that passed felt like another step away from her former life, another layer of distance between her and any hope of escape. The apartment itself was vast and opulent, a sprawling space filled with modern art, designer furniture, and breathtaking views of the city lights. But despite the luxurious surroundings, Bianca felt a profound sense of emptiness, a hollowness that echoed the loss she had suffered. It was a beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. Matteo gestured towards a sprawling living room, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the glittering cityscape. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, his voice still devoid of any warmth or emotion. Bianca hesitated, her eyes darting around the room, searching for some sign of what? An escape route? A friendly face? A glimmer of hope? She found none.
"Where am I?"
she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Matteo turned to face her, his eyes dark and unreadable.
"You are where you need to be," he said.
"Safe. Protected. Under my care." The words were meant to be reassuring, but they sent a shiver of fear down her spine. Safe? Protected? She felt anything but. She felt like a prisoner, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. He walked towards a bar cart, pouring himself a drink with the same deliberate grace he had displayed earlier. "Now," he said, his back to her, "we wait." "Wait for what?" He turned, his eyes meeting hers across the expanse of the room. "For your father's associates to realize the shift in power. For them to understand that the Vitali name no longer holds the same weight." Bianca felt a surge of anger, a fierce protectiveness towards her father's legacy, even in its shattered state. "My father was a powerful man," she said, her voice gaining strength. "He had respect. Loyalty." Matteo took a sip of his drink, his eyes narrowing. "Respect is earned, Bianca. Loyalty is bought. And your father ran out of both." His words were a cruel reminder of the reality she was facing. Her father's empire had crumbled, his power had vanished, and she was left to pick up the pieces, to navigate a treacherous world she barely understood. "What about me?" she asked, her voice laced with defiance.
"What do you want from me?"
He set his glass down on the bar, the sound echoing in the vast silence of the room. "For now," he said, his voice softening slightly, "I want you to adjust, to accept your new circumstances." He walked towards her, stopping just inches away, his presence overwhelming, his scent a blend of expensive cologne and something darker, more primal filling her senses. "You are a Vitali," he said, his voice a low murmur. "You have strength. Resilience. Use it." He reached out, his hand brushing against her cheek, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt of electricity through her. It was a gesture that was both intimate and threatening, a reminder of his power over her, of the precariousness of her situation. "But remember, Bianca," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, his eyes locking with hers, "you are mine now. And I always collect my debts." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the vast, opulent apartment, the city lights twinkling outside the windows like a million distant, uncaring stars. She felt a profound sense of isolation, a crushing weight of fear and uncertainty. But beneath the fear, a flicker of determination remained. She would adjust. She would accept her new circumstances. But she would not surrender. She would find a way to survive, to reclaim her life, to escape the gilded cage he had built for her. The first step, she realized, was to understand the rules of this new game, to learn the secrets of the man who now held her fate in his hands. She needed to know what made Matteo Greco tick, and the first step was to keep him talking, even if every word felt like a threat. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Shadows of the Past. The next few days were a blur of unsettling quiet and stifling luxury. Bianca was confined to the apartment, a gilded prison where her every need was met, yet her every movement felt observed. Matteo was a phantom presence, appearing and disappearing at will, his interactions with her brief and enigmatic. He treated her with a detached courtesy, a chilling politeness that was more unnerving than outright hostility. She spent hours wandering through the vast rooms, her footsteps echoing on the polished marble floors, her reflection staring back at her from the countless mirrored surfaces. The apartment was a masterpiece of modern design, but it lacked any sense of warmth or personality. It was a showpiece, not a home. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the occasional hum of the city outside and the distant murmur of Mateo's voice when he was on the phone, conducting business in hushed tones that sent shivers down her spine. She tried to decipher the snippets of conversation she overheard, hoping to glean some understanding of his world, of the forces that had shaped him, of the reasons behind her father's downfall. But the words were veiled, cryptic, spoken in a language she didn't understand, the language of power, of deals made in the shadows, of lives bought and sold. She found solace in the small library, a room tucked away at the back of the apartment, filled with shelves of leather-bound books. It was the only space that felt remotely comforting, a refuge from the cold, impersonal grandeur of the rest of the apartment. She spent hours poring over the volumes, losing herself in stories of other times, other worlds, other struggles. It was an escape, a temporary reprieve from the reality of her situation. One evening, as she was sitting in the library, lost in the pages of a worn copy of Wuthering Heights, Mateo entered the room. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, his expression unreadable. She hadn't heard him approach, and his sudden appearance startled her. "You seem drawn to stories of passion and loss," he said, his voice breaking the silence. Bianca closed the book, marking her place with a delicate silk ribbon. "They're a distraction," she replied, her voice guarded. He walked towards her, his movements fluid and graceful, like a predator stalking its prey. "From what?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "From reality," she said, her gaze meeting his. He stopped before her, his presence filling the small space, his scent that intoxicating blend of cologne and danger enveloping her. "Reality can be harsh," he said, his voice softening slightly. "But it can also be beautiful." She looked away, unable to hold his intense gaze. "I haven't seen much beauty lately," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the worn cover of the book. "Perhaps you're looking in the wrong places," he said. He moved closer, his body almost touching hers, his warmth radiating towards her, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled deep within her bones. She could feel the heat of his breath on her cheek, the subtle tremor in his hand as he reached out to touch a stray strand of her hair. "Tell me about your father," he said, his voice a low murmur. The question caught her off guard. She hadn't expected him to show any interest in her past, in the man he had so ruthlessly destroyed. What do you want to know?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Everything," he said. "Tell me about the man behind the legend. The father, not the Don." She hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal, of how much he already knew. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something that made her want to talk, to share the memories that were now so precious, so fragile. "He was complicated," she began, her voice gaining strength. "He was a man of contrasts. He could be ruthless, unforgiving, but he also had a softer side. He loved my mother fiercely. He adored me. He taught me how to ride a horse, how to play chess, how to appreciate the beauty of a sunset." She paused, her voice choked with emotion. "He was my hero." Mateo listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. "And what did he teach you about our world?" he asked, his voice gentle. "He tried to shield me from it," she said. "He wanted me to have a normal life. He wanted me to be happy." "And were you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Was she happy? She had been, she supposed. She had lived a life of privilege, of comfort, of security. But it had been a sheltered life, a life lived in ignorance of the darker realities that lurked beneath the surface. "I thought I was," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of understanding and something else. Something she couldn't quite decipher. "The past is a powerful force," he said. "It shapes us, defines us, haunts us. But it doesn't have to control us." He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his touch surprisingly gentle. "You are more than just your father's daughter, Bianca," he said. "You are you." His words resonated deep within her, stirring something that had been dormant for too long. A sense of self, of identity, that had been overshadowed by her father's legacy, by her role as a Vitali. But his words also filled her with uncertainty. Who was she really? What was her purpose? Her place in this new, dangerous world? She had been raised to be a wife, a mother, a society hostess.
But those roles were meaningless now.
She was adrift, lost, searching for something to cling to, something to guide her through the darkness. The whispers of her past, the memory of her father's love, the faint echo of her mother's laughter, these were the only anchors she had left. And she knew, with a growing certainty, that Matteo Greco held the key to unlocking the secrets of that past, the secrets that would determine her future. He was the enemy, but to win this battle, she had to understand him, and for that she'd have to play his dangerous game for just a bit longer. Chapter 4. The Scent of Betrayal and Lilacs. The first crack in Matteo's carefully constructed facade appeared, ironically, over a shared meal. He had insisted on dinner, a formal affair in the vast, echoing dining room. Bianca had dressed in the simple black dress she had brought from the villa, its understated elegance a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. She felt vulnerable, exposed like a specimen under a microscope. Matteo, as always, was impeccably dressed, his dark suit and crisp white shirt accentuating his powerful physique. He seemed relaxed, almost human, as he poured them both glasses of a deep red wine. The wine was a Barolo, a vintage she recognized from her father's cellar, a subtle reminder of the life she had lost. "Your father had exquisite taste," Matteo said, swirling the wine in his glass, his eyes meeting hers. Bianca took a sip, the rich, complex flavors a bittersweet reminder of happier times. "He appreciated the finer things in life," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "As do I," he said, his gaze lingering on her. The meal was a silent affair, the clinking of silverware against china, the only sound breaking the tension. The food was exquisite, prepared by a chef who remained unseen, a silent presence in the background. But Bianca had little appetite. She picked at her food, her mind racing, trying to decipher Matteo's motives, to understand the game he was playing. As the dessert course arrived, a delicate lilac-infused panna cotta, Matteo leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on her. "Tell me about your mother," he said, his voice soft. The question caught her off guard. Her mother had been a delicate, ethereal creature, a woman who had graced their lives with beauty and grace, but who had been taken from them too soon. She had died when Bianca was just a child, a loss that had left a gaping hole in her heart, a wound that had never fully healed. The scent of lilacs, her mother's favorite flower, always brought back a flood of memories, both sweet and painful. She was beautiful, Bianca said, her voice trembling slightly. Gentle.
Kind.
She loved lilacs. She gestured towards the dessert, her eyes welling up with tears. Matteo watched her, his expression unreadable. "Your father must have loved her very much," he said. "He did," Bianca said, her voice choked with emotion. He never really recovered from her death. A flicker of something, pain? Regret? Crossed Matteo's face, a fleeting emotion that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers, his touch surprisingly warm and comforting. "Loss changes us," he said, his voice low and husky. "It leaves scars." His words resonated deep within her, a shared understanding of the pain that bound them together, despite their vastly different circumstances. For a fleeting moment, she saw a glimpse of vulnerability in his eyes, a hint of the man beneath the mask. But the moment was shattered by the ringing of Matteo's phone, a jarring intrusion that broke the fragile connection between them. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening, his eyes turning cold. "Excuse me," he said, his voice clipped and formal. He rose from the table, his phone pressed to his ear, his back to her. She watched him as he spoke, his voice hushed and urgent, his words unintelligible. But she could sense the shift in his demeanor, the return of the ruthless, calculating man she had come to fear. As he spoke, she noticed a small, folded piece of paper lying on the table, near his plate. It had been hidden beneath his napkin, and had apparently fallen out when he stood up. Curiosity, and a growing sense of unease, compelled her to reach for it. She unfolded the paper carefully, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a handwritten note, scrawled in a language she didn't recognize, but one name stood out, clear and unmistakable: Alessandro Vitali. Her breath caught in her throat. What was this? A message? A threat? A clue? She quickly scanned the note, trying to decipher its meaning, her mind racing. But before she could make any sense of it, Matteo ended his call and turned back towards her. She quickly refolded the paper, slipping it into the pocket of her dress, her heart hammering against her ribs.
He must not see it.
She needed time to understand its significance, to unravel the secrets it held. He returned to the table, his expression carefully neutral, his eyes betraying nothing. A business matter, he said, his voice smooth and controlled. Nothing to concern yourself with. But Bianca knew better. Something had shifted, something had changed. The note was a tangible piece of evidence, a clue to a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. There were layers to this man, secrets hidden beneath the surface, and she was determined to uncover them, even if it meant risking everything. The scent of lilacs, once a source of comfort, now mingled with the acrid scent of betrayal, a chilling reminder of the dangerous game she was playing. She needed to know who sent that note, and what connection it had to her father. It felt like the first real clue she'd had since the fire, and her instincts told her it was vitally important. Chapter 5. Beneath the Mask of a Merciless Heart. The discovery of the note ignited a new sense of urgency within Bianca. She became a silent observer, watching Matteo with a heightened awareness, searching for any clue, any hint of his true motives. She played the role of the compliant captive, the grieving daughter, the grateful guest, all the while her mind was working, piecing together the fragments of information she had gathered. She learned to decipher his moods, to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the fleeting gestures that betrayed his inner thoughts. She noticed the way his jaw tightened when he received certain phone calls, the way his eyes narrowed when he spoke of certain individuals, the way his hand instinctively went to the scar on his eyebrow when he was deep in thought. She also began to explore the apartment more thoroughly, searching for any hidden clues, any secrets that might shed light on her situation. She discovered a locked room on the upper floor, a room that Matteo never entered, a room that emanated an aura of mystery and danger. She tried the handle, but it was firmly locked. She pressed her ear against the door, but heard nothing. The room remained an enigma, a tantalizing secret that she was determined to unlock. One afternoon, while Matteo was out, Bianca decided to take a risk. She had noticed that his study, a room filled with darkwood furniture and leather-bound books, was always left unlocked. She slipped inside, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and a faint trace of Matteo's cologne. It was a masculine space, a reflection of his power and authority. She scanned the shelves, her eyes searching for anything that might be of interest. She found nothing that seemed immediately relevant, only volumes on law, finance, and history. She moved to his desk, a massive piece of furniture that dominated the room. The surface was clear, except for a few neatly stacked papers and a leather-bound journal. She hesitated, knowing that she was crossing a line, that she was risking Matteo's wrath. But her curiosity, her need to know, outweighed her fear. She opened the journal carefully, her hands trembling. The pages were filled with Matteo's handwriting, a precise, elegant script that belied the ruthlessness of his character. She scanned the entries, her eyes searching for any mention of her father, of the note, of anything that might explain her current predicament. Most of the entries were mundane, records of meetings, financial transactions, and business dealings. But then, she found it. A single entry, dated a few weeks before the fire, that sent a chill down her spine.
Av ultimatum delivered.
Time is running out. The deal must be finalized. Her heart skipped a beat.
Av Alessandro Vitale.
Her father. An ultimatum? A deal? What deal? What ultimatum? She read the entry again and again, her mind racing, trying to make sense of it. It was clear that Matteo had been pressuring her father, that some sort of agreement had been in place, that something had gone terribly wrong. She continued to scan the journal, her eyes searching for more clues. She found a few other entries that mentioned her father, but they were cryptic, veiled in secrecy. She learned nothing more concrete, but the entries she had found confirmed her suspicions. Mateo was directly involved in her father's downfall. As she was about to close the journal, she heard a noise outside the door. Footsteps. Mateo was back. She quickly closed the journal, placing it back on the desk exactly as she had found it. She slipped out of the study, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. She had to get back to her room, to pretend that nothing had happened. She managed to reach her room just moments before Mateo entered the apartment. She could hear him moving around, his footsteps echoing through the vast space. She sat on the bed, her hands clenched in her lap, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She had taken a risk, a dangerous risk, and she had gotten away with it. But she knew that she was walking a tightrope, that one wrong move could have devastating consequences. She had seen beneath the mask, just for a moment. She had glimpsed the ruthless, calculating man behind the charming facade. And she knew that she was in even greater danger than she had previously imagined. She needed a plan, an ally, and fast, because staying one step ahead of Mateo Greco was proving to be more dangerous with each passing day. The locked room, the note, the journal entry, they were all pieces of a puzzle, and she was determined to solve it, even if it meant confronting the devil himself. Chapter 6. Echoes of Laughter, Shadows of Fear. The following evening, Mateo announced that they would be attending a festa, a celebration hosted by one of his associates. Bianca felt a surge of apprehension. It would be her first foray into Mateo's world, her first exposure to the people who had orchestrated her father's downfall. "It's important that you are seen," Mateo said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "That you are accepted." Bianca understood the unspoken message. She was a trophy, a symbol of his victory, a tool to solidify his power. She was to be paraded before his allies, a living testament to the Vitali family's demise. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple, elegant gown in a deep shade of emerald green, a color that complemented her dark hair and eyes. She wore the silver locket containing her mother's portrait, a tangible link to her past, a source of strength in this unfamiliar world. The festa was held in a sprawling villa on the outskirts of the city, a palatial estate that rivaled her own former home in its opulence and grandeur. The air was filled with the sounds of music, laughter, and conversation, a cacophony of noise that was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Bianca felt a wave of nausea as she stepped out of the car, the scent of expensive perfume and cigar smoke filling her nostrils. She clung to Mateo's arm, her hand trembling slightly, her eyes scanning the crowd, searching for any familiar faces, any hint of danger. The guests were a mixture of ages and backgrounds, all impeccably dressed, all exuding an air of wealth and power. They greeted Mateo with a mixture of respect and deference, their eyes lingering on Bianca with curiosity and speculation. She was introduced to a seemingly endless stream of people, their names and faces blurring together in a dizzying whirl. She smiled, she nodded, she made polite conversation, all the while her mind was racing, her senses on high alert. She noticed the subtle glances, the whispered conversations, the veiled threats that hung in the air. She sensed the undercurrent of tension, the rivalries and alliances that simmered beneath the surface of polite society. This was a world of predators, of wolves in sheep's clothing, and she was the lamb being led to the slaughter. She caught snippets of conversations, fragments of information that hinted at the complexities of Mateo's world, of the intricate web of power and influence that he controlled. She heard whispers of her father's name, of his mistakes, of his fall from grace. She felt a surge of anger, a fierce protectiveness towards her father's memory, even in its tarnished state. She wanted to scream, to defend him, to expose the hypocrisy and treachery of these people. But she knew that she had to remain calm, to play the game, to bide her time. During a brief respite from the introductions, Bianca found herself standing near a group of older women, their faces etched with the lines of time and experience. They were discussing, in hushed tones, the recent events, the changing of the guard, the new order. Alessandro Vitali was a fool, one of the women said, her voice laced with disdain. He grew soft, complacent. He forgot the rules, another woman said, her eyes narrowing. He broke the code. Bianca's heart skipped a beat. The code. What code? What rules? This was the first time she had heard any mention of a specific set of principles governing this world. Matteo Greco is different, a third woman said, her voice filled with a mixture of admiration and fear. He is ruthless, unforgiving. He will restore order. Bianca felt a chill run down her spine. Restore order? At what cost? She had seen the ruthlessness in Matteo's eyes, the coldness in his heart. She knew that he was capable of anything. As the evening wore on, Bianca began to feel increasingly isolated, increasingly vulnerable. She was surrounded by strangers, by enemies, by people who had played a part in her family's destruction. She longed for escape, for a familiar face, for a moment of peace. Suddenly, she felt a hand on her arm, a gentle touch that sent a jolt of surprise through her. She turned to see a man standing beside her, a man she hadn't met before. He was older, with kind eyes and a gentle smile, a stark contrast to the cold, calculating faces she had encountered throughout the evening. "You are Bianca Vitali, are you not?" he asked, his voice soft and melodic with an accent she couldn't place immediately. "Yes," she replied, her voice hesitant. "I knew your father," he said, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and regret. "He was a good man. A flawed man, but a good man." Bianca felt a surge of emotion, a wave of gratitude for this unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "My name is Lorenzo," he said, extending his hand. "Lorenzo Bellini." The echoes of laughter faded as the shadows of fear lengthened around them. He seemed genuine, a small island of calm in the stormy sea of the festa. She needed to know more. He was the key. Chapter 7. The Weight of Unspoken Vows. Lorenzo Bellini. The name resonated with a faint familiarity, a whisper from the edges of Bianca's memory. She couldn't place it, but she knew, instinctively, that he was important, that he held a piece of the puzzle she was desperately trying to solve. He led her away from the crowded ballroom, towards a quieter corner of the terrace, overlooking the manicured gardens. The night air was cool and refreshing, a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. "I apologize for intruding," Lorenzo said, his voice gentle and apologetic, "but I felt compelled to speak with you. To offer my condolences." Bianca looked at him, her eyes searching his face, trying to discern his true motives. He seemed genuine, his expression filled with a sincerity that she hadn't encountered in anyone else since her father's death. "Thank you," she said, her voice still hesitant. "It means a lot." "Your father and we were not always friends," Lorenzo said, his voice tinged with regret. "We had our differences, but we respected each other. We understood the rules." There it was again. The rules. The code. The unspoken laws that govern this world. "What rules?" Bianca asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What code are you talking about?" Lorenzo hesitated, his eyes scanning the surrounding area as if checking for eavesdroppers. "It's complicated," he said, his voice low and cautious. "There are traditions, obligations, vows that are unbreakable." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "Your father, he broke one of those vows," he said, his voice filled with sadness. "He betrayed a trust." Bianca felt a surge of anger, a fierce defense of her father's memory. "That's not true," she said, her voice shaking. "My father was an honorable man." Lorenzo held up his hand, a gesture of peace. "I know," he said, his voice soothing.
He was.
"But he made a mistake. A fatal mistake." "What mistake?" Bianca asked, her voice desperate. "What did he do?" Lorenzo hesitated again, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and fear. I cannot tell you," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's too dangerous." Bianca felt a wave of frustration, a desperate need to know the truth. "Please," she said, her voice pleading. "You're the only one who seems to care. The only one who knew him. You have to tell me." Lorenzo looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. "I can tell you this," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Your father was involved in something bigger than himself. Something that threatened the entire balance of power." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "And Matteo Greco, he was the one who exposed him. He was the one who brought him down." Bianca felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected as much, but to hear it confirmed, to hear it from someone who had known her father, who had been a part of this world, was devastating.
"But why?"
she asked, her voice trembling. "Why would he do that?" Lorenzo shook his head, his eyes filled with a weary resignation. "Power," he said, his voice bitter.
"Greed."
"Ambition. The same reasons that drive men to do terrible things." He reached out, his hand gently touching her arm. "Be careful, Bianca," he said, his voice warning. "Matteo Greco is a dangerous man. He is not to be trusted." "I know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I need to understand. I need to know the truth." Lorenzo looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and admiration. "The truth is a dangerous thing, Bianca," he said. "It can destroy you." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "But sometimes," he said, his voice softening, "it can also set you free." He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I will help you if I can, but it must remain a secret between us." A vow, a promise of forbidden knowledge, hung heavy in the air, unspoken but understood. The weight of these revelations pressed down on her, but for the first time since the fire, she felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile thread of possibility in the darkness. He was a risk, but he was also her only chance. Chapter 8. A dance on the edge of ruin. The tentative alliance with Lorenzo became Bianca's lifeline. He communicated with her discreetly, through coded messages left in pre-arranged locations, a tucked-away corner of the library, a specific bench in a nearby park, a folded note slipped under her door. Their meetings were brief and infrequent, always shrouded in secrecy, always under the looming threat of discovery. He revealed fragments of information, piecing together the story of her father's downfall, a story far more complex and treacherous than she could have ever imagined. He spoke of a long-standing feud between the Vitali and Greco families, a rivalry that stretched back generations, fueled by betrayal, bloodshed, and a relentless pursuit of power. He told her of a secret alliance her father had forged with a rival faction, a desperate attempt to break free from Matteo's growing influence, to reclaim control of his territory, to protect his family. But the alliance had been discovered, the plan had been betrayed, and her father had paid the ultimate price. Lorenzo also spoke of the covenant, the ancient code that governed the families, the unbreakable vows that bound them together, the rules that dictated their actions. He explained that her father had violated a key tenet of the covenant, a transgression that had demanded retribution, a debt that had to be paid. But he refused to reveal the specifics of her father's betrayal, the exact nature of the violation. "It's too dangerous," he repeated, his eyes filled with fear. "Matteo must not know that I am speaking to you. He would kill us both." Bianca understood the risk, the ever-present danger that surrounded them. But she was driven by a relentless need to know the truth, to uncover the secrets that had destroyed her family, to understand the forces that had shaped her life. She continued to play the role of the compliant captive, the grieving daughter, the grateful guest in Matteo's home. She endured his chilling politeness, his veiled threats, his constant scrutiny. She learned to mask her emotions, to hide her true feelings, to present a facade of acceptance and resignation. But beneath the surface, she was changing, transforming. The fear remained, but it was now tempered with a growing determination, a fierce resolve to reclaim her life, to avenge her father's death, to break free from Matteo's control. One evening, Matteo announced that he would be taking her to a private opera performance, rare opportunity to witness a world-renowned soprano. Bianca knew that it was another display of power, another attempt to control her, to mold her into the image he desired. She dressed carefully, choosing a gown that was both elegant and understated, a subtle act of defiance against his expectations. She wore the silver locket, her mother's portrait a constant reminder of the strength and resilience she carried within her. The opera house was a magnificent structure, a testament to the city's rich cultural heritage. The performance was breathtaking, the music soaring, the voices powerful, the story tragic and moving. But Bianca found it difficult to concentrate. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying her conversations with Lorenzo, piecing together the fragments of information he had revealed. During the intermission, Matteo led her to a private box, overlooking the crowded lobby. He offered her a glass of champagne, his eyes watching her intently. "You seem distracted," he said, his voice low and probing. Bianca forced a smile, masking her inner turmoil. "The performance is overwhelming," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. He studied her for a moment, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to penetrate her defenses. "You are adjusting well," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "To your new circumstances." "I'm trying," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He reached out, his hand brushing against her cheek, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver down her spine. "You are a Vitali," he said, his voice a low murmur. "You have strength, resilience, but you also have vulnerabilities." His words were a veiled threat, a reminder of his power over her, of the precariousness of her situation. She knew that he was testing her, probing her weaknesses, searching for any sign of defiance. "I'm aware of my vulnerabilities," she said, her voice steady, her gaze meeting his. He smiled then, a slow, predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes.
"Good," he said.
"Because I exploit vulnerabilities." The second act of the opera began, but Bianca barely noticed. Matteo's words echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder of the danger she faced. She was dancing on the edge of ruin, playing a dangerous game with a master manipulator. But she was no longer the naive, sheltered girl she had been. She was learning the rules, adapting to the game, and she was determined to survive, even if it meant confronting her vulnerabilities, even if it meant risking everything. She needed to find out what her father had done to break the covenant. Lorenzo was the key, but his fear was a wall she needed to break through. The music swelled, a crescendo of emotion, mirroring the turmoil within her, the precarious balance between survival and destruction. Chapter 9. The Thorns of a Forbidden Rose. Bianca knew she needed to push Lorenzo further, to convince him to reveal the full truth about her father's betrayal. The fragments of information he had provided were not enough. She needed to understand the why behind her father's actions, the specific transgression that had led to his downfall. She arranged another clandestine meeting, choosing a secluded corner of a botanical garden, a place filled with the vibrant colors and intoxicating scents of exotic flowers. The beauty of the surroundings was a stark contrast to the dangerous game she was playing, the heavy secrets she was carrying. She arrived early, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. She scanned the area, searching for any sign of surveillance, any indication that she was being followed. The air was thick with the scent of roses, a bittersweet reminder of her mother's garden, of the life she had lost. Lorenzo arrived a few minutes later, his face etched with worry, his eyes darting around nervously. "We shouldn't be meeting like this," he said, his voice low and urgent. "It's too risky." "I need to know the truth, Lorenzo," Bianca said, her voice firm and determined. "I need to understand what happened to my father." He hesitated, his eyes filled with fear. "I've told you all I can," he said, his voice shaking. "It's too dangerous." "Please," Bianca said, her voice pleading. "I'm not afraid. I need to know." She reached out, her hand gently touching his arm. "You said my father broke a vow, violated the covenant." "What vow? What was it that he did?" Lorenzo looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for a difficult task. "It involved a woman," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Bianca's heart skipped a beat. "A woman? What woman?" "Her name was Isabella Rossi, Lorenzo continued, his voice low and hesitant. She was from a rival family. A family that had been at war with the Vitales for generations. Bianca felt a wave of confusion. A rival family? An affair? Was that the reason for her father's downfall? It seemed insufficient. There had to be more. But that's not all, is it? She asked, her voice probing. There's more to the story. Lorenzo nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a weary resignation. Isabella, she was not just any woman, he said. She was promised to another, to a man of great power. A man who held a significant position within the covenant. Bianca's mind raced. Promised to another? A powerful man? A violation of the covenant? The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, but the picture they formed was far more complex and dangerous than she had imagined. Who? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Who was she promised to? Lorenzo hesitated, his eyes darting around nervously. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a barely audible murmur. She was promised to Matteo Greco, he said. Bianca felt a cold shock run through her, a wave of nausea washing over her. Matteo? Isabella Rossi was promised to Matteo? Her father had been involved with Matteo's betrothed? The revelation was a bombshell, a devastating blow that shattered her perception of her father, of Matteo, of everything she thought she knew. It explained Matteo's ruthlessness, his coldness, his relentless pursuit of her father. It was not just about power, about territory, about business. It was personal. It was revenge. He knew? Bianca asked, her voice trembling. Matteo knew about my father and Isabella? Lorenzo nodded, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. He knew, he said. And he used it. He manipulated the situation. He exploited the betrayal. He used the covenant to destroy your father. Bianca felt a surge of anger, a burning rage that consumed her. Matteo had not only destroyed her father's life, he had stolen his love, his honor, his legacy. And he had done it all in the name of revenge, under the guise of upholding the covenant. He used me, she said, her voice filled with bitterness. He's been using me all along. I'm just a trophy, a symbol of his victory. Lorenzo reached out, his hand gently touching her arm. Be careful, Bianca, he said, his voice warning. Matteo is more dangerous than you know. He will stop at nothing to protect his power, his position. He pulled a small, thorny rose from a nearby bush, handing it to her. This is like your situation. Beautiful, but full of hidden dangers. The thorns pricked her finger, a tiny drop of blood welling up, a stark reminder of the pain and betrayal that surrounded her. She had the truth, or at least a significant part of it. But the truth was a dangerous weapon, and she needed to be careful how she used it. The forbidden rose, a symbol of her father's transgression, was now in her hands, and she had to decide what to do with it. Chapter 10. Cracks in the Foundation of Loyalty. The knowledge of her father's affair with Isabella Rossi and Matteo's subsequent revenge changed everything for Bianca. It cast a new light on every interaction, every conversation, every gesture. She saw Matteo not just as a captor, but as a man driven by a deep, personal vendetta, a man fueled by betrayal and a thirst for retribution. She continued to play the role of the compliant captive, but her mind was working overtime, analyzing every detail, searching for weaknesses, planning her next move. She knew that she was walking a tightrope, that one wrong step could have devastating consequences. But she was no longer driven by fear alone. She was fueled by a burning desire for justice, for revenge, for a chance to reclaim her life. Lorenzo continued to provide her with information, carefully and discreetly. He revealed the intricacies of the covenant, the ancient laws that govern the families, the complex web of alliances and rivalries that define their world. He explained the power structures, the hierarchies, the unspoken rules that dictated their actions. She learned that the covenant was not just a set of rules, but a living entity, a force that shaped their lives, their destinies, their very identities. It was a system of control, of checks and balances designed to maintain order, to prevent chaos, to ensure the survival of the families. But it was also a system that could be manipulated, exploited, used as a weapon. Matteo had mastered the Covenant. He had learned to bend it to his will, to use it to achieve his own ends. He was a master strategist, a skilled manipulator, a ruthless opponent. Bianca began to notice cracks in the foundation of loyalty that surrounded Matteo. She observed the subtle tensions between his lieutenants, the veiled rivalries, the unspoken resentments. She sensed that not everyone was as devoted to him as they appeared, that there were those who questioned his methods, who feared his power, who secretly yearned for a change. She started to cultivate relationships with some of the people in Matteo's inner circle, carefully and discreetly. She used her charm, her intelligence, her vulnerability to gain their trust, to learn their secrets, to identify potential allies. She focused on two individuals in particular, Marco, Matteo's second-in-command, a man who had served the Greco family for decades, a man who seemed to harbor a quiet resentment towards his boss, and Sofia, Matteo's personal assistant, a young woman who had witnessed his ruthlessness firsthand, a woman who seemed to be struggling with her conscience. Bianca approached Marco cautiously. Using their shared history, he had known her father as a bridge. She spoke of her father's legacy, of his vision for the future, of his desire for peace and prosperity. She subtly hinted at Matteo's betrayal, at his violation of the Covenant, at his ruthless pursuit of power. Marco listened intently, his expression unreadable. He didn't openly acknowledge her accusations, but she sensed a flicker of agreement in his eyes, a hint of understanding. He offered a few cryptic remarks, veiled warnings, subtle clues that confirmed her suspicions. She approached Sofia with a different tactic, appealing to her sense of empathy, her compassion, her humanity. She spoke of her own pain, her loss, her fear. She shared her vulnerability, her doubts, her hopes for a better future. Sofia responded with a cautious kindness, a hesitant sympathy. She revealed snippets of information, fragments of conversations she had overheard, subtle hints of Matteo's plans. She confirmed Bianca's suspicions about Marco's growing discontent, about the unease within Matteo's inner circle. Bianca realized that she was not alone, that there were others who questioned Matteo's authority, who yearned for a different path. She was building a network of allies, a fragile web of trust and shared secrets, a potential force for change. She had to tread carefully and continue building her leverage. Lorenzo had given her the why, now she needed the how to take back what was rightfully hers. The cracks were there, and she was determined to widen them, to shatter the foundation of Matteo's power, to bring his empire crumbling down. The risk was immense, but the potential reward, freedom and justice, was worth it. Chapter 11. The Unveiling of Hidden Truths. Bianca's clandestine efforts to gather information and cultivate allies began to bear fruit. Marco, increasingly disillusioned with Matteo's leadership, started to provide her with more substantial information, revealing details about Matteo's operations, his finances, his weaknesses. He confirmed that Matteo had manipulated the Covenant to justify his actions against her father, that he had fabricated evidence, bribed witnesses, and exploited loopholes to achieve his goals. Sofia, torn between her loyalty to Matteo and her growing sense of guilt, started to share more sensitive information, including access codes, passwords, and schedules. She revealed that Matteo was planning a major deal, a transaction that would solidify his power and expand his influence, a deal that involved a significant transfer of funds to an offshore account. Bianca realized that this deal was the key, the linchpin of Matteo's empire. If she could disrupt it, if she could expose it, she could bring him down. But she needed proof, concrete evidence that she could use to discredit him, to turn his allies against him, to shatter his carefully constructed facade. She decided to take a significant risk. Using the access code Sofia had provided, she gained entry to Matteo's private study late one night, while he was away on a supposed business trip. She knew that she was walking into the lion's den, that one wrong move could have devastating consequences. But she was driven by a desperate need for justice, for revenge, for a chance to reclaim her life. The study was, as she remembered it, a masculine space filled with dark wood furniture, leather-bound books, and the faint scent of Matteo's cologne. She went straight to his desk, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. She activated his computer, using the password Sophia had given her, and began to search through his files. She found a wealth of information, a vast archive of documents, emails, and financial records. She scanned through the files, her eyes searching for anything that might be relevant to the upcoming deal, anything that could expose Mateo's treachery. She found it. A series of encrypted files, labeled Project Phoenix, that contained detailed information about the deal, including the names of the participants, the amount of money involved, and the location of the offshore account. She quickly copied the files onto a secure flash drive, her hands trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. She had the proof she needed, the evidence that could bring Mateo down. But as she was about to leave the study, she noticed another file, a hidden folder tucked away in a remote corner of the hard drive. The folder was labeled simply Isabella. Curiosity and a lingering sense of unease compelled her to open it. The folder contained a collection of photographs, videos, and letters, all documenting the relationship between her father and Isabella Rossi. Bianca scrolled through the images, her heart aching with a mixture of sadness and betrayal. She saw her father, smiling, laughing, looking happier than she had ever seen him. She saw Isabella, beautiful, vibrant, full of life. She saw their love, their passion, their shared moments of joy. But she also saw the pain, the guilt, the fear in their eyes. She saw the letters, filled with longing, with regret, with the desperate plea to keep their love a secret. She realized that their relationship had been more than just a fleeting affair, more than just a violation of the covenant. It had been a deep, profound connection, a love that had defied the boundaries of their world, a love that had ultimately destroyed them both. She also found a final letter, written by Isabella to her father, dated just days before his death. In the letter, Isabella revealed that she was pregnant, that she was carrying his child. Bianca felt a wave of shock, a surge of emotion that overwhelmed her. A child? Her father had a child with Isabella? A half-sibling she had never known existed? The revelation changed everything. It added another layer of complexity to the story, another layer of tragedy, another layer of motivation. Mateo had not only killed her father, he had also deprived her of a sibling, of a connection to her father's legacy. She closed the folder, her mind reeling, her heart aching. She had found more than she bargained for, more than she could have ever imagined. She had uncovered hidden truths, secrets that had been buried for years, secrets that had the power to change everything. She had the evidence, the motive, and now, a deeply personal reason to continue her fight. The unveiling of these truths had strengthened her resolve, but also deepened the emotional stakes. She left the study carrying not only a flash drive, but the heavy burden of her family's past. Chapter 12. A storm of regret and revelation. The discovery of Isabella's pregnancy and the existence of a half-sibling sent Bianca reeling. The emotional weight of this revelation was almost as heavy as the burden of her father's betrayal and Mateo's treachery. She felt a profound sense of loss, of missed opportunities, of a connection that had been severed before it could even begin. She confided in Lorenzo, sharing the contents of the Isabella file, revealing the existence of the child. Lorenzo was shocked, his face paling as he listened to her story. He had known about the affair, but he had no idea about the pregnancy. "This changes everything, Bianca," he said, his voice filled with concern. "Mateo, he would never allow that child to live. It would be a threat to his power, to his legacy." Bianca felt a surge of fear, a desperate need to protect this unknown sibling, this innocent child who was caught in the crossfire of a deadly feud. "We have to find them," she said, her voice determined. "We have to find the child." Lorenzo hesitated, his eyes filled with doubt. "It's too dangerous, Bianca," he said. "Mateo has eyes and ears everywhere. He would discover our plans." "We have to try," Bianca said, her voice pleading. "I can't abandon them. They're family." Lorenzo looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and fear. He knew that she was right, that they couldn't ignore this new revelation, that they had a moral obligation to protect the child. "I know some people who might be able to help," he said, his voice hesitant. "People who owe me favors. People who are not afraid of Matteo." He agreed to make inquiries, to discreetly search for any information about Isabella Rossi and her child. He warned Bianca that it would take time, that it would be a dangerous and difficult task. Meanwhile, Bianca continued to gather evidence against Matteo, using the information provided by Marco and Sofia. She learned more about Project Phoenix, the details of the upcoming deal, the individuals involved. She discovered that the deal was even more significant than she had initially realized, that it involved a network of corrupt officials, influential politicians, and international criminals. She realized that exposing Matteo would not only bring him down, but it would also disrupt a vast criminal enterprise, a web of corruption that stretched far beyond the confines of their world. She was playing with fire, but she was determined to see it through. She arranged another meeting with Marco, pressing him for more information about the deal, about Matteo's plans. Marco was increasingly hesitant, increasingly fearful of Matteo's wrath. He warned Bianca that she was taking too many risks, that she was playing a dangerous game. "Matteo is suspicious," he said, his voice low and urgent. "He knows something is going on. He's tightening security. He's watching everyone." Bianca felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that she was running out of time, that Matteo was closing in. She had to act quickly, before he discovered her plans, before he silenced her forever. As she was leaving the meeting with Marco, she received a message from Sofia, a frantic, coded message that sent her heart racing. "Emergency. Meet me. Usual place. Now." Bianca rushed to their usual meeting spot, a small, secluded cafe near Sofia's apartment. She found Sofia waiting for her face pale and distraught, her hands trembling. "He knows," Sofia said, her voice barely a whisper. "Matteo knows about us. He knows about the information I've been giving you." Bianca felt a wave of nausea, a surge of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. How had he found out? "He found the messages," Sofia said, her voice choked with tears. "The coded messages we've been exchanging. He tortured me, Bianca. He made me tell him everything." Bianca felt a surge of guilt, a crushing weight of responsibility for Sofia's suffering. She had dragged her into this dangerous game. She had exposed her to Matteo's wrath. "I'm so sorry, Sofia," she said, her voice filled with remorse. I never meant for this to happen." "It's not your fault," Sofia said, her voice weak. I knew the risks. I wanted to help." She reached out, her hand grasping Bianca's. "He's coming for you, Bianca," she said, her voice urgent. "He knows everything. You have to get away. You have to disappear." A storm of regret and revelation crashed down on Bianca. She had been so close to exposing Matteo, so close to achieving justice. But now, everything was falling apart. She had underestimated him, she had been too reckless, and she had put herself and her allies in mortal danger. She had to escape, to survive, but the thought of leaving Sofia behind, of abandoning her to Matteo's mercy, was unbearable. But Sofia was insistent. It was Bianca who held the proof, the ability to eventually bring justice. Chapter 13. The Price of Freedom, the Cost of Love. Bianca knew she had to disappear, and fast. Sofia's warning had been clear. Matteo was coming for her, and he would show no mercy. She had the evidence, the proof of his crimes, but she needed time to figure out how to use it, how to expose him without putting herself and her allies in further danger. She made the agonizing decision to leave Sofia behind, promising her that she would find a way to help her, that she would not abandon her. Sofia, despite her fear, urged Bianca to go, to protect herself, to ensure that Matteo's crimes would not go unpunished. Bianca returned to the apartment, her mind racing, her heart pounding in her chest. She packed a small bag, taking only the essentials: the flash drive containing the evidence against Matteo, the silver locket with her mother's portrait, a few changes of clothes, and a small amount of cash she had managed to save. She knew that she couldn't stay in the city, that Matteo's reach extended far and wide. She needed to get out, to disappear, to find a safe haven where she could plan her next move. She thought of Lorenzo, her only true ally, the man who had risked everything to help her. She couldn't contact him directly, it was too dangerous. But she remembered a safe house he had mentioned, a secluded villa in the countryside, a place where he had hidden people before. She decided to take a chance, to head to the villa, hoping that Lorenzo would find her, that he would help her escape. She left the apartment, slipping out unnoticed, blending into the bustling city streets. She took a series of buses and trains, traveling for hours, putting as much distance as possible between herself and Matteo. The journey was arduous and terrifying, her senses on high alert, her eyes constantly scanning for any sign of pursuit. She felt like a fugitive, a hunted animal, her every move fraught with danger. She finally arrived at the villa, a sprawling, dilapidated structure hidden amidst rolling hills and dense forests. It was a far cry from the luxurious apartment she had left behind, but it offered a sense of security, a temporary refuge from the storm. The villa was empty, dusty, and neglected, but it showed signs of recent habitation. There were a few basic supplies: food, water, blankets, enough to sustain her for a few days. She settled in, her mind racing, her heart heavy with worry and regret. She had escaped Matteo, but at what cost? She had left Sophia behind. She had abandoned her allies. She had lost everything she had ever known. She was alone, isolated, and hunted. But she still had the evidence, the proof of Matteo's crimes. And she still had her determination, her resolve to fight for justice, for revenge, for a chance to reclaim her life. As night fell, she lit a small fire in the hearth, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. She sat by the fire, clutching the silver locket, her mother's portrait a source of comfort and strength. She thought of her father, of Isabella, of the child they had shared, a child she had never known, a child who was now in danger. She thought of Lorenzo, of Marco, of Sophia, of all the people who had risked their lives to help her. She felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of grief, anger, regret, and determination. She had paid a heavy price for freedom, for the truth, but she was not broken. She would survive this. She would find a way to expose Matteo, to bring him to justice, to protect the innocent. She heard a noise outside, a faint rustling in the bushes. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it Matteo? Had he found her? She grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, her hands trembling, her body tense and ready. She stood in the shadows, her eyes fixed on the door, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The door creaked open slowly, and a figure stepped inside. It was Lorenzo. Bianca felt a wave of relief wash over her, so intense that her knees almost buckled. She lowered the poker, her body relaxing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Bianca," Lorenzo said, his voice filled with concern. "You're safe. Thank God." He rushed towards her, embracing her tightly, his relief evident. "I was so worried," he said, his voice trembling. "I feared the worst." I had to get away," Bianca said, her voice choked with emotion. "He knows everything. Sophia, she warned me." Lorenzo held her at arm's length, his eyes searching hers. "Sophia, is she?" Bianca shook her head, her eyes welling up with tears.
"She's alive," she said.
"But he tortured her. He made her tell him everything." Lorenzo's face hardened, his eyes filled with anger. "I will make him pay," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I swear it." He led her to a chair, his hand gently guiding her. "You're safe now, Bianca," he said, his voice soothing. "I will protect you. I will help you." He explained that he had been searching for her, that he had used his contacts to track her movements, that he had anticipated her arrival at the villa. He had brought supplies, food, water, and a secure phone, so they could communicate without fear of being intercepted. The cost of her freedom had been immense, but with Lorenzo's arrival, she was no longer completely alone. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope, a spark of possibility in the darkness. Chapter 14. Scars that bind, wounds that heal. The secluded villa became Bianca's sanctuary, a place where she could begin to heal, to regroup, to plan her next move. Lorenzo was her constant companion, her protector, her confidant. He provided her with not only physical security, but also emotional support, helping her to process the trauma she had endured, the losses she had suffered. They spent hours talking, sharing their stories, their fears, their hopes. Bianca learned more about Lorenzo's past, about his connection to her father, about his own experiences with loss and betrayal. He revealed that he had once been a powerful figure within the Covenant, a respected leader, a man of influence. But he had been betrayed by his own allies, stripped of his power, forced into exile. He had lost everything, just like Bianca. Their shared experiences created a bond between them, a deep connection forged in the crucible of adversity. They understood each other, they supported each other, they drew strength from each other. Lorenzo also used his contacts to gather information, to track Matteo's movements, to assess the situation. He learned that Matteo was furious, that he had launched a massive manhunt for Bianca, that he was determined to silence her, to retrieve the evidence she possessed. He also learned that Marco had been arrested, that he was being held captive by Matteo, that he was being tortured for information. Sophia, miraculously, had managed to escape, disappearing into the vast, anonymous city. Bianca felt a surge of guilt, a crushing weight of responsibility for Marco's suffering, for Sophia's precarious situation. She knew that she had to act quickly, that she couldn't allow them to suffer for her actions. She and Lorenzo began to devise a plan, a strategy to expose Matteo, to bring him to justice, to protect her allies. They knew that it would be a dangerous and difficult task, that they would be facing a powerful and ruthless opponent. But they were determined to succeed, to fight for what was right, to reclaim their lives. They decided to use the evidence Bianca had obtained, the files from Matteo's computer, to expose his crimes to the authorities, to the media, to the other families within the Covenant. They knew that it would be a risky move, that it could backfire, that it could put them in even greater danger. But they had no other choice. Lorenzo used his contacts within the police force, within the journalistic community, within the Covenant, to discreetly leak the information, to plant the seeds of doubt, to create a groundswell of opposition to Matteo. They also decided to reach out to the other families, to appeal to their sense of justice, to their fear of Matteo's growing power, to their desire for stability and order. They knew that it would be a difficult task, that many of the families were loyal to Matteo, that they were afraid of his wrath. But they also knew that there were those who were disillusioned with his leadership, who questioned his methods, who yearned for a different path. They hoped to tap into that discontent, to create a coalition of forces that could challenge Matteo's authority. As they worked together, planning, strategizing, preparing for the final confrontation, Bianca and Lorenzo grew closer, their bond deepening, their connection strengthening. They found solace in each other's company, comfort in each other's presence, strength in each other's support. Bianca realized that she was falling in love with Lorenzo, that she had developed feelings for him that went beyond friendship, beyond gratitude. She saw his kindness, his compassion, his strength, his resilience. She saw the scars he carried, the wounds he had suffered, the pain he had endured. But she also saw his hope, his determination, his unwavering belief in justice, in redemption, in a better future. She saw the man beneath the mask, the vulnerable, compassionate human being who had been hidden beneath layers of pain and loss. She knew that their relationship was complicated, that it was fraught with danger, that it might be impossible. But she couldn't deny her feelings. She couldn't ignore the connection that had grown between them, the love that had blossomed in the midst of darkness and despair. The scars of their pasts bound them together, but the wounds were slowly healing, replaced by a fragile hope, a tentative love that bloomed amidst the ruins of their former lives. She did not know if it could last, but she decided she would cherish what they did have, for as long as possible. Chapter 15. The Taste of Deception on Silver Tongues. The plan to expose Matteo was set in motion. Lorenzo, using his extensive network of contacts, arranged a clandestine meeting with representatives from several key families within the Covenant. The meeting was to take place at a neutral location, a centuries-old trattoria known for its discretion and its unwavering adherence to the old ways. Bianca insisted on attending the meeting, despite Lorenzo's concerns for her safety. She knew that she was the key witness, the living proof of Matteo's treachery. She had to be there, to present the evidence, to confront her accusers, to fight for her father's legacy. They arrived at the trattoria separately, taking elaborate precautions to avoid detection. The atmosphere inside was thick with tension, the air heavy with unspoken suspicion and veiled threats. The representatives from the families were a mixture of ages and backgrounds, all powerful figures, all accustomed to wielding influence and commanding respect. Bianca sat beside Lorenzo, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. She felt the weight of their gazes, the scrutiny of their eyes, the unspoken judgment in their silence. Lorenzo began by presenting the evidence, outlining Matteo's crimes, his violation of the covenant, his betrayal of her father. He spoke with passion and conviction, his voice resonating with authority and experience. He then introduced Bianca, presenting her as the key witness, the living testament to Matteo's ruthlessness. Bianca rose to her feet, her body trembling slightly, her gaze meeting theirs. She spoke of her father, of his love for her, of his desire for peace and prosperity. She spoke of Matteo's betrayal, of his manipulation, of his relentless pursuit of power. She spoke of Isabella, of the child, of the stolen legacy. She presented the files from Matteo's computer, the evidence of his financial crimes, his involvement in illegal activities, his network of corruption. She showed them the photographs, the letters, the proof of her father's affair with Isabella, the evidence of Matteo's personal vendetta. The representatives listened intently, their expressions unreadable, their reactions carefully guarded. Some seemed skeptical, others intrigued, a few openly hostile. One of the representatives, a man named Don Angelo, a long-standing rival of Matteo's, spoke first. "These are serious accusations," he said, his voice gravelly and deep. "You have proof?" Bianca nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I do," she said, her voice clear and strong. "The evidence is irrefutable." She presented the flash drive containing the encrypted files, offering it as proof of Matteo's guilt. Don Angelo took the flash drive, his eyes narrowing, his expression skeptical. "We will examine this evidence," he said. "We will deliberate. We will reach a decision." The meeting adjourned, the representatives leaving separately, their faces grim and determined. Bianca and Lorenzo were left alone, the tension still thick in the air, the outcome uncertain. "We did all we could," Lorenzo said, his voice weary. "Now we wait." They returned to the villa, their hearts heavy with anticipation and apprehension. They knew that they had taken a significant step, that they had planted the seeds of doubt, that they had challenged Matteo's authority. But they also knew that the battle was far from over, that Matteo would not go down without a fight. As they were preparing dinner, Lorenzo received a secure message, a cryptic communication from one of his contacts within the covenant. He read the message, his face paling, his eyes widening in disbelief. They betrayed us," he said, his voice choked with anger. "Don Angelo, he's sided with Matteo. He's turned the evidence over to him." Bianca felt a surge of despair, a crushing weight of disappointment. They had been so close to exposing Matteo, so close to achieving justice. But now, everything was falling apart. "The meeting, it was a trap," Lorenzo said, his voice bitter. "A deception. They used us." He explained that Don Angelo had long harbored a secret ambition to take control of the covenant, that he had seen Matteo's growing power as a threat, that he had used Bianca and Lorenzo to weaken him, to create an opportunity for himself. He had pretended to be sympathetic, to be interested in the evidence, but he had been playing his own game, manipulating them, using them to achieve his own ends. The taste of deception was bitter on Bianca's tongue, the realization that they had been pawns in a larger game, a game of power and ambition that extended far beyond their personal struggles. They had walked into a trap and had to escape it again. Chapter 16. A tapestry of twisted fates. The betrayal by Don Angelo and the other families was a devastating blow. Bianca and Lorenzo were back to square one, their carefully laid plans shattered, their hopes dashed. They were fugitives again, hunted not only by Matteo but now also by a powerful faction within the Covenant. They knew that they had to disappear, to go deeper underground, to find a way to survive. They couldn't stay at the villa. It was too exposed, too vulnerable. Lorenzo used his contacts to arrange for a new safe house, a remote cabin high in the mountains, a place where they could hide, regroup, and plan their next move. The journey to the cabin was perilous, fraught with danger. They traveled under the cover of darkness, avoiding roads, sticking to back trails, relying on Lorenzo's knowledge of the terrain and his network of contacts to guide them. The cabin was small and rustic, offering little in the way of comfort, but it was secluded and secure. It was a far cry from the opulent villa, from the luxurious apartment, from the life Bianca had once known. But it was a refuge, a temporary sanctuary from the storm. They settled in, their spirits low, their bodies weary, their minds racing. They had lost almost everything: their allies, their resources, their hope. But they still had each other, and they still had the burning desire for justice, for revenge, for a chance to reclaim their lives. As they sat by the fire, huddled together for warmth, Bianca thought of Sophia, of Marco, of the unknown child, of all the innocent people who had been caught in the crossfire of this deadly feud. She felt a surge of anger, a renewed determination to fight, to expose Matteo, to bring him to justice, to protect those who could not protect themselves. "We can't give up, Lorenzo," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "We have to keep fighting." Lorenzo looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. He knew that she was right, that they couldn't surrender, that they had to find a way to overcome this setback. "I know," he said, his voice weary.
"But how?"
"We're outnumbered, outgunned, outmaneuvered." Bianca thought for a moment, her mind racing, searching for a solution, a way out of this seemingly impossible situation. She remembered something Sophia had told her, a secret that Matteo had kept hidden for years, a vulnerability that could be exploited. "There's one thing," she said, her voice hesitant. "Sophia, she told me about a secret. Something Matteo fears." She explained that Matteo had a hidden weakness, a secret that he had guarded for years, a vulnerability that could be used against him. It involved a past betrayal, a broken vow, a hidden enemy who had been waiting for an opportunity to strike. "It's a long shot," Bianca said, her voice doubtful. "But it's our only chance." Lorenzo listened intently, his eyes narrowing, his mind working. He knew that it was a risky move, that it could backfire, that it could put them in even greater danger. But he also knew that they had nothing to lose, that they had to take a chance, that they had to fight fire with fire. He contacts an informant he trusts and explains his new, risky idea. The informant agrees it's the only chance and gives them a name and location: Antonio Rossi. The name sent a shiver down Bianca's spine. It had the same last name as Isabella. They decided to pursue this lead, to seek out this hidden enemy, to forge an unlikely alliance, to turn Matteo's own tactics against him. They knew that it would be a dangerous and difficult task, that they would be walking into the unknown, that they would be facing a powerful and ruthless opponent. But they were driven by a desperate need for justice, for revenge, for a chance to reclaim their lives. They were weaving a tapestry of twisted fates, their lives intertwined with those of their enemies, their destinies hanging in the balance. They had to find Antonio Rossi and hope that he would be the key to their salvation. He was their last, best hope. Chapter 17. The Reckoning of Old Debts. The journey to find Antonio Rossi was a descent into the heart of darkness, a plunge into the murky depths of Matteo's past. Lorenzo's informant had provided them with a location: a dilapidated palazzo on the outskirts of a forgotten coastal town, a place steeped in history and shadowed by secrets. They traveled in disguise, assuming false identities, adopting the mannerisms of ordinary travelers. They knew that Matteo's reach extended far and wide, that his spies were everywhere, that one wrong move could expose them, could lead to their capture, their death. The palazzo was a crumbling ruin, a testament to a bygone era of grandeur and decadence. It stood on a cliff overlooking the turbulent sea, its walls battered by the wind and waves, its windows dark and empty, its gardens overgrown and wild. It was a place of ghosts, of memories, of unspoken secrets. They approached the palazzo cautiously, their senses on high alert, their weapons concealed beneath their clothes. They found the main entrance locked, the heavy wooden doors barred and bolted. Lorenzo used his skills to pick the lock, his movements swift and silent, his experience evident. They slipped inside, the darkness swallowing them whole, the silence broken only by the creaking of the ancient timbers and the distant roar of the sea. The air was thick with the scent of decay, of mildew, of salt and sea air. They explored the palazzo, their footsteps echoing through the vast, empty halls, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. They found evidence of recent habitation, a few meager furnishings, a scattering of personal belongings, a flickering candle in a dusty sconce. They found Antonio Rossi in the library, a room filled with decaying books, crumbling manuscripts, and the lingering scent of old paper and leather. He was an older man, his face etched with the lines of time and experience, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. He was seated at a large, ornate desk, a single lamp illuminating his features, a pistol lying within easy reach. He looked up as they entered, his gaze unwavering, his expression guarded.
"Who are you?"
he asked, his voice raspy and deep.
"What do you want?"
Lorenzo stepped forward, his hand raised in a gesture of peace. "We mean you no harm," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "We are friends of Isabella Rossi." Antonio's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. "Isabella is dead," he said, his voice cold and bitter. "And her memory has been desecrated." "We know," Bianca said, stepping forward. "We know who killed her. And we know who killed my father." Antonio looked at her, his eyes searching hers, his expression questioning.
"Who are you?"
he asked again. "I am Bianca Vitali," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Alessandro Vitali was my father." Antonio's eyes widened in surprise, a flicker of recognition in his gaze. He studied her for a moment, his expression softening slightly. "You have her eyes," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Isabella's eyes." Lorenzo explained their situation, their flight from Matteo, their quest for justice, their discovery of the truth about Isabella's death and Alessandro's betrayal. He told him about the covenant, about the meeting, about Don Angelo's treachery. Antonio listened intently, his expression shifting from suspicion to anger, from disbelief to a burning desire for revenge. He revealed that he was Isabella's brother, that he had been searching for her killer for years, that he had sworn to avenge her death. "Matteo Greco," he said, his voice filled with hatred. "He took everything from me. He stole my sister. He destroyed my family. He corrupted our legacy." He explained that he had been gathering evidence against Matteo, that he had been waiting for an opportunity to strike, that he had been biding his time, preparing for the final reckoning. Bianca and Lorenzo realized that they had found a powerful ally, a man driven by the same burning desire for justice, for revenge, for a chance to reclaim what had been lost. They shared their evidence with Antonio, the files from Matteo's computer, the photographs, the letters, the proof of his crimes. Antonio examined the evidence, his eyes narrowing, his expression hardening. "This is enough," he said, his voice filled with determination. "This is enough to bring him down." They forged an alliance, a pact sealed in blood and shared grief, a union of forces driven by a common purpose. They decided to combine their resources, their knowledge, their networks, to launch a final, decisive attack against Matteo. It was time for the reckoning of old debts, for the sins of the past to be answered, for justice to be served. The dilapidated palazzo, a symbol of decay and ruin, became the crucible of their vengeance, the birthplace of a new alliance. Chapter 18. Where Shadows Meet the Dawn. The alliance between Bianca, Lorenzo, and Antonio Rossi was a union forged in desperation and fueled by a shared thirst for justice. They knew that they were facing a formidable enemy, a man who commanded vast resources, wielded immense power, and possessed a ruthless cunning that had allowed him to maintain his grip on the Covenant for years. They spent days in the crumbling palazzo, poring over the evidence, strategizing their next move, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Antonio, with his intimate knowledge of Matteo's past and his network of contacts within the underworld, proved to be an invaluable asset. He revealed secrets about Matteo that even Lorenzo had been unaware of, exposing vulnerabilities that could be exploited, weaknesses that could be targeted. They decided to strike at the heart of Matteo's power, his control over the Covenant. They would expose his crimes not only to the authorities, but also to the remaining families, the ones who had not yet sided with Don Angelo, the ones who still held to the old ways, the ones who valued honor and tradition above all else. Antonio used his contacts to arrange a secret meeting, a clandestine gathering of the unaligned families, a council that would be held in the catacombs beneath the city, a place steeped in history, a place where the ancient laws of the Covenant had been forged. Bianca, Lorenzo, and Antonio knew that they were walking into a trap, that Matteo would be expecting them, that he would be prepared to use any means necessary to silence them. But they had no other choice. They had to confront him, to expose his treachery, to bring him to justice. They prepared meticulously, arming themselves with weapons, equipping themselves with communication devices, anticipating every possible scenario. They knew that their lives were on the line, that this was their last chance, their final stand. The night of the meeting arrived, a night of darkness and uncertainty, a night where shadows danced with the flickering light of hope. They descended into the catacombs, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient secrets, the silence broken only by the dripping of water and the echo of their footsteps. The catacombs were a labyrinth of narrow passageways, hidden chambers, and forgotten tombs. They navigated the maze with Antonio as their guide, his knowledge of the hidden pathways proving essential. They reached the meeting chamber, a vast, cavernous space illuminated by flickering torches, the walls lined with ancient sarcophagi, the air heavy with anticipation. The representatives from the unaligned families were already assembled, their faces grim and resolute, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. As Bianca, Lorenzo, and Antonio entered the chamber, a hush fell over the gathering. All eyes turned to them, the weight of their expectations, their hopes, their fears, pressing down on them. Before they could speak, the chamber doors slammed shut, the sound echoing through the vast space. Armed men, Matteo's soldiers, emerged from the shadows, surrounding them, their weapons trained on them. Matteo stepped forward, his face a mask of cold fury, his eyes burning with hatred. "You are foolish to come here," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "You have walked into your own tomb." Bianca met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest, but her voice steady and resolute. "We came here to expose your lies," she said, "to reveal your treachery, to bring you to justice." Matteo laughed, a cold, mocking sound that echoed through the chamber. "Justice?" he said. "There is no justice here, only power. And I am the power." He signaled to his men, and they advanced, their weapons raised, their intent clear. But before they could reach them, Antonio stepped forward, his voice booming through the chamber. "Stop," he commanded. "You are bound by the Covenant. You cannot shed blood in this sacred place." Matteo sneered. "The Covenant is meaningless," he said. "I make the rules now." Antonio turned to the assembled representatives, his eyes blazing with righteous anger. "He has defiled our traditions," he said. "He has betrayed our trust. He has murdered in cold blood. Will you stand by and allow him to destroy everything we hold sacred?" The representatives hesitated, their faces conflicted, their loyalties divided. They looked at Matteo, at his armed men, at the power he wielded. But they also looked at Bianca, at Lorenzo, at Antonio, at the evidence they presented, at the truth that shone in their eyes. A murmur ran through the chamber, a growing sense of unease, a questioning of Matteo's authority. The foundations of his power, built on fear and intimidation, began to crumble. Where shadows had reigned, the first rays of dawn, of truth, began to break through. The balance of power was shifting, and Mateo's grip was weakening. Chapter 19. The Heart's Uncharted Territory. The tension in the catacombs was palpable, a thick, suffocating weight that pressed down on everyone present. Mateo's authority, once absolute, was now being challenged, questioned, undermined by the very people he had sought to control. One by one, the representatives from the unaligned families began to step forward, voicing their dissent, expressing their outrage at Mateo's crimes, their support for Bianca, Lorenzo, and Antonio. The tide was turning, the momentum shifting, the balance of power tilting precariously. Mateo, realizing that he was losing control, that his carefully constructed empire was crumbling around him, lashed out in desperation. He ordered his men to attack, to kill everyone who opposed him, to silence the truth forever. But his men hesitated, their loyalty wavering, their faith in their leader shaken. They looked at the assembled representatives, at the faces of their peers, at the weight of tradition, at the ancient laws of the covenant that bound them together. Marco, Mateo's former second-in-command, the man who had been tortured for his loyalty to Bianca, stepped forward, his face bruised and battered, but his eyes filled with defiance. "We will not obey," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "We will not betray the covenant. We will not serve a tyrant." His words were a spark that ignited a fire, a catalyst that unleashed a wave of rebellion. Mateo's men, one by one, lowered their weapons, refusing to follow his orders, turning against their former leader. Mateo was left standing alone, his power shattered, his authority stripped away, his empire in ruins. He was a king without a kingdom, a leader without followers, a man consumed by hatred and driven by a thirst for revenge that had ultimately led to his downfall. Bianca stepped forward, her gaze meeting his, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and triumph. "It's over, Mateo," she said. "You've lost." Mateo looked at her, his eyes filled with a burning rage, a desperate, unyielding hatred. He lunged at her, his hands reaching for her throat, his intent to kill, to silence her forever. But before he could reach her, Lorenzo intervened, stepping between them, shielding Bianca from Mateo's attack. He grappled with Mateo, the two men struggling fiercely, their bodies locked in a desperate embrace. Antonio, seeing his chance, drew his pistol and fired, the shot echoing through the vast chamber. Mateo staggered backward, his hand clutching his chest, his eyes widening in disbelief. He collapsed to the ground, his body lifeless, his reign of terror finally over. Silence descended upon the catacombs, a silence broken only by the ragged breathing of the combatants, the echoes of the gunshot, the weight of the moment. The battle was over. Justice had been served. The representatives from the families, shaken but resolute, gathered around Bianca, Lorenzo, and Antonio, offering their support, their gratitude, their allegiance. They pledged to uphold the covenant, to restore honor and tradition, to rebuild what Mateo had destroyed. Bianca, exhausted but triumphant, looked at Lorenzo, her eyes filled with gratitude and love. He met her gaze, his expression mirroring her emotions, his hand reaching out to hers. They had survived. They had overcome impossible odds. They had fought for justice, for revenge, for a chance to reclaim their lives. And they had found something unexpected, something precious, something that had blossomed in the midst of darkness, and despair, a love that had defied the boundaries of their world, a connection that had transcended the barriers of family and tradition. They left the catacombs, emerging from the darkness into the dawn, the first rays of sunlight illuminating their faces, their bodies weary, but their spirits renewed. They had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and they had emerged victorious. They had faced their fears, confronted their demons, and found their way back to the light. They had found each other. But as they embraced, a chilling thought crossed Bianca's mind. Isabella's child. The child was still out there, somewhere, unaware of the danger, unaware of their heritage. Their journey was not over. A new quest emerged. The path ahead would be difficult, but hand in hand, they left the darkness, venturing into the heart's previously uncharted territory, uncertain of the future but ready to face all obstacles together. It was not just survival, but life and all its risks and possibilities that now stretched before them. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties. The death of Matteo Greco marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. While the immediate threat was eliminated, the lingering consequences of his reign of terror and the unresolved issue of Isabella's child cast a long shadow over Bianca and Lorenzo's newfound peace. The families, under the guidance of Lorenzo and Antonio, began the arduous task of dismantling Matteo's criminal empire, rooting out corruption, and restoring the integrity of the covenant. It was a slow, painstaking process, fraught with challenges and setbacks, but they were determined to rebuild, to create a better future. Bianca, however, could not fully embrace the peace until she had found her half-sibling, the child of Alessandro Vitali and Isabella Rossi. The thought of this unknown relative, living in ignorance of their heritage and potentially in danger, haunted her. She and Lorenzo dedicated themselves to the search, using their combined resources and contacts to track down any leads, any whispers, any hint of the child's whereabouts. They followed a trail of fragmented information, piecing together the puzzle of Isabella's life after her separation from Alessandro. Their investigation led them to a small, remote village in the mountains, a place where Isabella had sought refuge, a place where she had given birth to her child, a place where she had lived in hiding, fearing Matteo's wrath. They learned that Isabella had died a few years after giving birth, succumbing to a sudden illness. The child, a girl, had been raised by a local family, unaware of her true parentage, unaware of the dangerous legacy she carried. Bianca and Lorenzo found the girl, now a young woman named Sophia, a bittersweet coincidence, mirroring the name of their lost ally. She was living a simple, unassuming life, working as a seamstress in the village, her days filled with quiet routine, her nights untroubled by the shadows of her past. Bianca approached Sophia cautiously, revealing her identity gradually, carefully explaining the complex history of their families, the tragic love affair between Alessandro and Isabella, the deadly feud that had torn them apart. Sophia was initially skeptical, disbelieving, overwhelmed by the revelation. She had grown up believing that she was an orphan, that her parents had died in a tragic accident. The truth was a shock, a disruption of her reality, a burden she had never expected to bear. But as Bianca shared her story, as she showed her the photographs, the letters, the evidence of her parents' love, Sophia began to accept the truth, to embrace her heritage, to understand the forces that had shaped her life. Bianca and Lorenzo brought Sophia back to the city, introducing her to the families, integrating her into their world, offering her the protection and support she needed. Sophia, initially hesitant and withdrawn, gradually began to adapt, to find her place, to embrace her new identity. But the past was not so easily buried. Don Angelo, still harboring ambitions of power, saw Sophia as a threat, a potential rival, a symbol of the Vitali legacy he sought to eradicate. He began to plot against her, to undermine her position, to sow seeds of discord among the families. Bianca, sensing the danger, knew that she had to protect Sophia, that she had to confront Don Angelo, that she had to put an end to his treachery once and for all. She arranged a meeting with him, a final confrontation, a showdown that would determine the future of the covenant, the fate of her family, the safety of her half-sister. The meeting took place in the same trattoria where they had first presented their evidence against Matteo, the place where Don Angelo had betrayed them. This time, however, Bianca was prepared. She had the support of the families, the loyalty of Lorenzo and Antonio, the strength of her convictions. She confronted Don Angelo, exposing his treachery, revealing his ambition, challenging his authority. She presented evidence of his own misdeeds, his own violations of the covenant, his own attempts to manipulate the families for his personal gain. Don Angelo, cornered and exposed, lashed out in desperation, attempting to discredit Bianca, to sow doubt among the families, to cling to his dwindling power. But his efforts were in vain. The families, finally seeing him for what he truly was, a power-hungry, manipulative, deceitful leader, turned against him. Don Angelo was stripped of his position, banished from the Covenant, his power shattered, his legacy destroyed. He was left alone, a broken man, a victim of his own ambition, his own treachery. With Don Angelo's defeat, the final obstacle was removed, the last thread extinguished. Bianca, Lorenzo, and Sofia were finally free to rebuild their lives, to embrace their future, to create a new legacy, a legacy founded on justice, on honor, on love. The final confrontation had been not just of power, but of hearts and loyalties, a testament to the enduring strength of family, the unwavering pursuit of justice, and the transformative power of love. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together, their bonds strengthened by the trials they had overcome, their hearts united by a shared destiny. Epilogue. Years passed. The scars of the past remained, etched into the memories of those who had lived through the tumultuous era of Matteo Greco and Don Angelo's treachery. But the wounds had healed, replaced by a sense of peace, a renewed hope, a strengthened resolve. The Covenant had been reformed, its ancient laws revitalized, its traditions honored, its purpose redefined. The families, united under a new leadership, had learned from the mistakes of the past, embracing a future of cooperation, of mutual respect, of shared prosperity. Bianca and Lorenzo, their love deepened by the trials they had overcome, had built a life together, a life filled with joy, with purpose, with a profound sense of belonging. They had married in a simple, private ceremony, surrounded by their closest friends and allies, their vows echoing with the sincerity of their commitment, the strength of their bond. They had adopted Sofia, legally and emotionally, welcoming her into their family, offering her the love and support she had been denied for so long. Sofia, blossoming under their care, had found her place in the world, embracing her heritage, honoring the memory of her parents, forging her own path. They had children of their own, a son and a daughter, who grew up surrounded by love, by security, by the knowledge of their family's history, by the lessons learned from the past. They were raised to value justice, to honor tradition, to embrace compassion, to cherish the bonds of family. The villa, once a symbol of loss and despair, had been rebuilt, transformed into a home filled with laughter, with warmth, with the echoes of happy memories. It was a place of refuge, a sanctuary, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Lorenzo, his wisdom and experience valued by the families, had become a respected elder, a guiding force, a voice of reason and reconciliation. He had found redemption, a sense of purpose, a fulfillment of his own destiny. Bianca, her strength and determination undiminished, had become a leader in her own right, a champion of justice, a protector of the innocent, a voice for the voiceless. She had fulfilled her father's legacy, not by perpetuating the cycle of violence and betrayal, but by breaking it, by forging a new path, by creating a better future. They often visited the botanical garden, the place where their tentative alliance had begun, the place where they had shared their secrets, their fears, their hopes. They would walk among the roses, the scent of the flowers a bittersweet reminder of the past, a fragrant symbol of their enduring love. One evening, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the city, Bianca and Lorenzo stood hand in hand, watching their children play, their laughter echoing through the garden. "We did it, Lorenzo," Bianca said, her voice filled with a quiet contentment. "We survived. We won." Lorenzo smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his gaze filled with love and admiration. "We did," he said. "And we found something more. We found each other." He leaned down and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of years of shared experiences, of battles fought and won, of a love that had endured, that had blossomed in the midst of darkness, that had illuminated their lives. The past was behind them, its scars a reminder of the pain they had endured, its lessons a guide for the future. The present was theirs, a gift to be cherished, a moment to be savored, a love to be celebrated. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together, their hearts united, their spirits strong, their destiny intertwined. The story had been one of betrayal, loss, and ultimately, triumph.
They were at peace.
The end.